Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, we are joined by David Somerville and Justin Alexander to talk about their latest Kickstarter, Planegea. But before we get into today's episode, remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, and click a prompt where we will create your world. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Twitter over at Let's Worldbuild. You can join our community on Discord, or if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon with a link for both of those in the description below. Now, on to today's episode. Hello, and we are joined today with our special guest, Justin Alexander from the Alexandrian. Barely a guest at this point. He's been on once before. And we are also joined by the creator of Planegea, David Somerville. Gentlemen, glad to have you both on.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So for those of us who might not know you too well, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're here and who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am the creator of a new Stone Age 5th edition setting called Planegea. I've been around the game design space for a while. I've kickstarted some board games and RPGs before, but this is my first real entry into a serious major 5th edition setting. So I am here to talk about that and have the extreme good fortune of getting to work with the legendary Justin Alexander on it. So I'm just here to sort of like fanboy about that a little bit, and also, I guess, talk about magic dinosaurs.
Fantastic. Yeah. I know what you mean, having had Justin on once before. Justin, why are you here? Like, I mean, on a spiritual level, on a more metaphysical level, but more specifically, why are you with us on the podcast today?
Well, apparently it's to get my ego fluffed. And I am 100% here for it. I am here today. I'm the RPG producer at Atlas Games, and David had come to us. He'd been working on Planegea for a while. Atlas does a lot of fulfillment activities, and so David approached us originally saying, hey, I'm thinking about kickstarting this 5th edition setting. Would you guys be interested in kind of like helping me with the shipping and stuff? And we took a look at it and said, we would like to do more than that. We would like to throw all of our passion and resources at this amazing setting that you have created, this primordial, primal, rich setting that has everything you love in 5th edition reimagined for this Stone Age setting. This is one of the things that really appealed to me about the setting, was that it wasn't just like you see other people attempt Stone Age D&D, and it's often like, well, you got to get rid of this, and you've got to get rid of that, and then the stuff that's left over, there's like people with clubs. And what David was really done, he said, it's much more interesting if everything you love in 5th edition is still in this setting in a primal form. We take nothing away. We just twist your expectations at every step along the way. And then we pour in all of this amazing creative energy, realizing this incredibly unique, dark, rich, raw setting, full of adventure. So we got super excited about it. We said, David, we have to do more than this. We have to come in and we're gonna work with you. We're gonna pour all of our resources into making this just the most amazing book and the most amazing setting possible. And David seemed equally excited by that prospect as well. So on a spiritual level, I am here because David created something awesome, and I am super excited to be part of his awesome.
That's fantastic. We're really excited to talk about it. Now, before we even really get into the meat, and I mean raw, uncooked meat of this whole Planegea, where can people find Planegea as it stands now, and where it might be in Kickstarter?
Well, you're going to want to, what you want to know is go to the Atlas Games website, which is at atlas-games.com, and then /Planegea, Planegea is where you can find all the current websites with the links. There's some free PDFs that'll give you a sneak peek into the setting, and also links to the Kickstarter right now.
Fantastic. And David, is there? I hear that you have a podcast of some kind. You might want to plug that.
Yeah, sure. It's called the Clan Fire. It is the sort of core Planegea story team. Just some awesome minds who really gathered around the idea very early and have been sort of the people who I'm super eager to kick around new material with. We all got together and hung out on Discord one time for, an hour and a half. And we're like, well, this should be a podcast. So we are doing that. It's called The Clan Fire. It's every other week. And it's a not... it's a pretty wholehearted ripoff of the early episodes of Keith Baker's The Manifest Zone. So if you like that, you'll like this.
I just so happened to binge through that as soon as I found out it was a thing. So yeah, that is, and having listened to a couple of the episodes, it is very reminiscent of The Manifest Zone, just as interesting in certain cases. That's for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So in terms of diving into the setting, I think one of the great places we could start is what it means to be a character in Planegea. And in your Clanfire episodes, you talk about, there's one that's talked specifically about the 3 themes that govern the setting. And those are kinetic action, primordial horror, and mystic wonder. So I wonder if you could get us started there, because that would really get us a good understanding of what this is about.
Yeah, I'd love to. So that's exactly right. Those 3 themes were really core to the designing of the setting. My earliest concept was it was sort of Mad Max Fury Road with woolly mammoths. How can we get that going? So the kinetic action is in pursuit of that, right? It shouldn't just be you're standing hitting a stegosaurus with a stick. It should be you're like riding on a thundering herd of mammoths, leaping in the air, calling down lightning as you're slamming into the ground against a horde of undead velociraptors. Like, have you guys watched Primal at all by Genndy Tartakovsky?
Hell yes, I have.
Yeah, it's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's not just it's not just standing there and hitting something. It is sort of everything is in motion. All action is cranked to 11. And we wanted to design a setting where it had sort of set pieces and monsters and weapons and sort of high enough stakes that you could really get there in your campaign. So that's first pillar. And anytime we're looking at designing anything for the setting, we make sure that it's got that kinetic sort of in motion aspect, and can just sort of at any moment feel like it just could just like fall off a cliff and become, midair combat.
Absolutely. I think that any setting where you can feel the impact of the club as it ripples up your arm, or like really feel the tear of the teeth, like that's one of the best things about settings, is that what you're trying to evoke. And I think that kinetic action is such a great pillar to build a setting like this around. Like that's really awesome to start with. Yeah,
totally. And and then from there, I mean, I think that having the raw materials is really part of that too. It's very easy. Something that's great about the setting is it's so easy to imagine, right? Because there's not like blacksmithing is something I know nothing about. So anytime I'm DMing, a medieval fantasy campaign, I'm like, you go in the blacksmith and he's blacksmithing. But in this world, it's like, okay, you're wearing armor. It is like, you got a dinosaur skull on your left shoulder, a turtle shell on your right shoulder. You're wrapping a bear skin around all that. And you can like use all 5 senses in a way, because everything is sort of stripped down to its raw elements, all of which pushes for that really kinetic in-world feeling. The immersion is just can be really, really awesome in the setting.
Kind of speaking on the sort of vibe of the setting, I was really curious about the taboos that you established to really limit the advancement in the setting and keep it from kind of getting beyond this primordial Stone Age era.
Totally. Yeah. So an early challenge I posted about the setting online a couple of times, like 3 or 4 times. I was like, wouldn't Stone Age D&D be really cool? And every single time I did, people were like, ha, yeah, ooga booga, me hit dragon with stick. And I was just like, that's not what I'm talking about. How do I? So I eventually, I deeply believe, and it seems very apparent that the earliest people were just as brilliant, just as savvy, just as canny as any of us are, probably more so because they had to figure out everything from scratch. And I wanted to make sure that, you could play a character with a intelligence score of 16, 18, 20 in the game and not feel sort of out of place. So we created a DM and like story building tool called the Black Taboos, which the idea is that there is this metaphysical force, which is canonically unexplained. It is, nobody knows what it is or why, but there's something out there called the Hounds of the Blind Heaven. And anytime you break one of the 4 black taboos, the hounds just come after you and kill you. So the hounds enforce no writing, no numbers higher than 9, no coins, and no wheels, which are sort of 4 big signs of moving past the Stone Age. There's also a setting villain who opposes agriculture, but technically it's a different thing than the hounds. So all of these are there to help the DM have an in-world reason why brilliant wizards wouldn't have sort of moved everyone on into the next era. And it's the thing, anytime someone joins our Discord server, which please everyone, come on this Discord server, it's a fun time. Anytime someone joins, they're like, but I have questions about the black taboos. And so what I always say is, it's there to promote the fun. And if your table lights up about it, it's like, that's awesome, then, lean into it. If your table is like, well, I don't need that, to have fun, we can all just like not invent the alphabet, then that's cool too. And you can sort of dial it down. So throughout the setting, we really worked to make sure that there were these dials that you could adjust to find the right fun for your group.
Yeah, one of the things that I really love, one is like a history nerd, and 2 as someone who loves exploring the implications of world building here, are you're, instead of gold or instead of like wealth in any way, that really kind of gets pared down in the setting. And on top of that, you use salt in weight as like kind of a pseudo currency, which again, as a history nerd, dear God, I loved that as soon as I heard it. I was like, yeah, historically accurate, add it in there to absolutely. Why not?
Agreed. Love it.
Yeah.
For sure. Salt's awesome. And it's like useful, but it's also, what I love about it is, if you're going to the seaside, like it drops in value to almost nothing. So it creates this whole really playful way for DMs to be able to like, well, your money's no good here. What else are you going to do? And that playing with barter can be really, really fun.
What I think is interesting about the black taboos too is that it underscores like your second pillar, which is that primordial horror, which to me, when I was listening to you describe the theme, a large part of that is the lack of knowledge about the world or its metaphysics. And I think so the horror comes from not knowing. So since the black taboo is like fundamentally or unknowable, that's interesting because I think that undergirds the whole concept.
Yeah, I think that's, I hadn't actually put my finger on this until that point you just made. So thank you. But I think that that you're right. Having something that's fundamentally essential to survival in the universe and fundamentally unknowable in the hounds and the black taboos does really evoke that that Stone Age setting where you kind of looked up at the sky and it flashed with light and rain came down and you didn't know why. I never put those 2 things together until just now, but I think you're exactly right.
Well, because I remember you were referencing Fury Road too, and this is getting into the third pillar, but you were referencing Fury Road when I think you're talking about the women that was freed, and they were looking at a piece of writing in in one of the trucks, and that was like it was almost wondrous to them. So when you said like looking up at the sky and not knowing, like that connects like the horror and the wonder together, which I think is really cool.
They're really deeply connected. On either side, it's this feeling of transcendence and something bigger and beyond you. And with horror, that's something that's threatening and hostile, and with wonder, it's something that is going to surround you, even if you don't understand it, and like lift you up. And the world has a ton to do with proto-gods. There's this whole idea that you don't have like the god of lightning or the god of, magic. It's that lion on that hill has lived there for forever and has sort of made enough kills and survived long enough that people have started to worship them, and they have accrued magic, and now they're a god, and now they're immortal and powerful, but they're then like tied to that place for forever and they can't leave it. So you get sort of these very like hyper local gods scattered around that can be anything. And they're not moral beings, right? They're just sort of like, they are whatever that animal or place or sort of like weather event or whatever that became a god. That thing is just still following its instincts, whatever those might be. And so that feeling of wonder and just sort of encountering things around every corner that are kind of too big for you to deal with, but are still tangible and tactile. That's what we're going for with the wonder aspect.
I think this really it touches on something that I think is really essential to understanding why the setting can be so big. Is that there's this primal quality there, and this primordial quality. There's this idea that what you're seeing in Planegea is what came before the sort of modern fantasy, D&D fantasy that we know today. But what really makes it special is that rather than seeing it as like, well, this is all the stuff that was before all the cool stuff happened, instead it said, no, back here, everything was bigger and larger and trying to figure out what it was. And so it's many different things, and it's large and expansive and exciting, and it's almost Tolkien-esque. Like it almost says, that whole idea like in Tolkien about like diminishing and going into the West. Like Planegea will make you look at D&D and say, oh, this is like what happens after the world has gotten smaller and more controlled and everyone got like actuarial jobs basically. But before that, things were cool, and like people rode mammoths and like fought T-Rexes, and it was really awesome.
Prehistoric Silmarillion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, every setting has like, in the beginning when the gods and the giants raged against each other, and it's like, yeah, let's just play then.
Right. No, go back. That sounded cool. Let's not get to that part yet. Yeah.
But let's go back to the place where God was just like in the next valley over, and you have to go kill him because he's causing problems. Yeah.
I think the first Planegea one shot I ran for like our Patreon backers literally was, I think they were either first or third level, and their job was, go kill a god. And that's what you're doing at first or third level.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. And really what it sounds to me, it's like, it's an evocation of like the classical sense of awe, where it is like yourself in the face of something, as you said, that is tangible, but is essentially unknowable as well. And it's that feeling that you get, especially in nature, I think. And I think that your setting does a really great job of evoking that sense as well.
Thank you. That's what we're going for. So that's awesome to hear.
Yeah. And actually, I've had this question lined up since our last Justin Alexander interview, because I've been thinking about exploration in RPGs in particular, but for a while now, let's just put it that way. And one thing that I found that Planegea does rather well is it gives exploration some kind of like, there's a spice to your exploration within Planegea that I really appreciate, because I often find that exploration within tabletop role-playing is often quite boring. And because in Planegea there's no maps, there's nothing written down, and everything is like you're discovering it for the first time, I think that is one of the most interesting ways that I've seen someone approach exploration, especially on like a larger setting like this one. And Justin, I know that you just did something for the Alexandrian that is basically a takedown of exploration. So I'd love to hear both your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already nailed most of the major points here. That what makes exploration really cool in Planegea is what makes exploration cool in any setting is you take an environment, you have to have the environment be mysterious and unknowable, which like the very nature of Planegea does that for you, and then you need to fill it with really awesome stuff for the players to be, when they find it, they have to go like, wow, I am so glad that we found this. Like, this is an experience that I would not have had if I'd stayed home. And Planegea inherently does that as well by just allowing you to pack in, awesome stuff around every corner and a god in every valley, right? So all of that happens. I think the other thing too that really makes exploration work at sort of the heart of Planegea is also the fact that so much about life living in the world of Planegea comes back to your clan and your kin and these cultures and these people who you are dependent upon in the face of raw, uncaring, primal nature, and also who, because you're adventurers, depend on you to see them over and through the darkness and the dangers and the horrible unknown of like David was saying, like the lightning flashes in the sky and the strange magics in the next valley. So there's that mutual cycle of dependence, and that dependence is routed through the exploration and discovery of your environment. If you don't find the next safe place for your clan to stay, if you don't find the safe cave where the strange storm of purple rain won't wash away your soul, then you are in jeopardy. You are in trouble. And if you can't find the next place for safe food or safe water, so all of those things, those primal needs of survival and mutual dependence, all also get driven through sort of the exploration of Planegea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, numbers are unknowable, right? So distance is unknowable. If someone says, we want to, find this landmark, they say it's that way. And you say, how far? And you're like, I don't know. You keep walking. So I think that's something. And then the world of Planegea is mobile. It is still shifting around. So literally, a cliff that was in a certain place last season might not be there. Forests pick up and move all the time. Rivers wander. So your typical, just like, oh, I can't get lost. I've been here before. Well, here isn't the same. And also, by the way, there's something in the bushes that's stalking you. So it raises the stakes, and it makes all of the environment something that you're having to perpetually rediscover. There's no such thing as a simple journey along a road from point A to point B.
So this is a little bit of a departure, but I think it's important because one of the things we try to talk about on our podcast is a little bit about the creator and, where you're coming from as a creator. So I wanted to know, because you mentioned in the description of the game, you were inspired by, pulp, sword, and sorcery. You had mentioned a little bit about Eberron and the challenge of creating that and how that inspired you. So I want you to talk a little bit about, like, where do you come from the position of, like, playing D&D when you were a kid, and, like, what are you like now as a creator, and what are you influenced by?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I basically failed my investigation check as a kid to find the secret door of D&D. I didn't know about it. I was raised really conservative, and so I did all these things that, looking back on them, like, that was me trying to play D&D. Like, I have a notebook with like a world made with all these different factions that are fighting against each other that never turned into a book because I didn't want a book. I wanted a setting. We played a little like draw your own maze game, and then like imagine walking down these doors and what did you find? But it wasn't D&D because that didn't exist as far as I knew. It wasn't until I was like an adult, had a couple kids, that I had heard of D&D in the ether. And it was late in 2014, just before 5th edition came out, when I sort of was working at a job with a bunch of cool, nerdy folks, and was like, hey, have any of you ever played D&D? And all of them were like, no. It's like, me neither. I feel like we're all super nerdy and we should do that. So we did it. We, my buddy Jeff Martin, bravely took on the DM role for 4th edition and ran us through a game. And I came upstairs after playing it, because we had it at my place. And my wife was like, so what is it? Like, what was it like? Because she didn't grow up with it either. And I was like, it's like a board game, but you can just literally do anything, I think.
Exactly.
And so then it was
describe, right?
Yeah, I've told people describing a session of D&D is exactly identical as describing a dream that you have.
Yes.
Yep.
Nobody wants to hear it because they didn't experience it,
Yeah. And then I was in this room and there was a clown there, but then all of a sudden we were falling, and
It's very and then everyone clapped vibes, but
yes,
it really means a lot to you,
yeah.
because I just ran a session fairly recently, and I actually cried for the first time at the table, and I've never been able to do that before. And I'm like, wow, this is such a cool hobby that I'm into right now, where you can like really explore really just about everything that you can in the human experience. I love it. There's really nothing like it. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. And wonder, it's a pillar of the world because it's important to me too. And so that feeling of sort of like wonder and being transported beyond, the assumptions that we make about our everyday is, I think, the core of the thing that's amazing to me about D&D. And yeah, I'm right there with you. I feel like it's a really, really special thing.
I'm so glad we got that last pillar in there. I was trying, but we got it in there.
We did it. It only took us 20 minutes.
We got there.
So the settings origin then, because you were asking about that too, is my wife and I lived in DC. We decided we decided we didn't want to raise our kids there because it's this really stressful area for us. And also our families had all kind of like moved away or like were in transition. So I quit my job, got a remote job. We got an RV and we started a year-long trip around the US to try and find a new hometown to raise our kids in.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And as I was prepping the RV, there's about a month's worth of work to get the RV ready. And as I was prepping it, I was like, all right, I want a podcast because I'm like doing all this labor. I'm going to listen to, I don't know, I like D&D. How about this Manifest Zone podcast? So I start listening to Keith Baker and co talk about the fantasy world search and the origins of Eberron. And it was just such a fascinating question to me of like this call to make something. This was Keith's particular genius, I think, was to not be restrictive about his setting, but have sort of all of the goodness of D&D in a setting that reinterpreted it. And I was like, man, that's such a cool exercise. Like if I was back then, what would I do? And, jotted down a couple of ideas, and Stone Age D&D felt like the one that was the one that stuck. So that's where it started. And, I wrestled with various ideas that didn't really come together very quickly until I was listening to so many podcasts, by the way, have inspired the setting. I was listening to the Appendix N Book Club, which is totally brilliant. It's an examination of the literature that inspired the earliest versions of D&D, but it's done through a really critical, thoughtful lens, which is amazing because they're not critical, thoughtful books as a rule. And but I had never really invested myself in like that kind of sword and sorcery and didn't really have a category for what that was. And as I was listening to like book after book about this and discussion of it, it sort of just unlocked this a lot of what we've been talking about, like that primal feeling, that raw feeling, like the danger, the darkness, the personal stakes, and all of that really, I think, was what launched the setting forward and got us most of the way to where we are now.
Well, I was curious, like, how did you decide on this primordial Stone Age era in particular? Like, was that something that interested you from the get-go, or?
Yeah, there's sort of an origin story to that. I, like, the first year I was married to my wife, she arranged a surprise. I was just like there on a Saturday morning hanging out, and then my two older brothers show up and they're like, we're kidnapping you, get in the van. I was like, where are we going? They're like, you don't know, let's go. And that was when Roland Emmerich's 10,000 BC was in theaters, which I had expressed interest in, and they were like, yup, we're doing this. And so we drove to Uptown Theater in, I think, Bethesda or Chevy Chase, Maryland, and which is just an enormous screen. It's huge. And so sort of without warning, I was thrown into this prehistoric fantasy. And I haven't watched the movie since because I'm worried that if I do, I'll like see all the holes in it. In my mind, it is a perfect film. I know it's not, but in my head, it's flawless. And I think the thing that really stuck with me is like, spoiler alert, but the movie starts from, mammoth hunters and this nomadic tribe, and then they encounter a more civilized society who is sort of like much bigger and scarier than them, and they have to deal with that. And it has a lot to do about personal heroism and what does it mean to be a hero. And I think all of that got lodged in my brain and just lay dormant for a long time. But then when, I was listening to the Manifest Zone and thinking about it, I honestly have no idea what the other ideas I jotted down were, because when it came to like, hey, that nobody's done that, like rewind the clock all the way back and unlock all of those feelings I felt while I was like suddenly in this dark theater watching this perfect, flawless masterpiece of a movie. That's what I wanted to get at.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I was so excited to learn about the setting because I love like ancient history, prehistory, primitive tech, everything along those lines, and like hadn't really seen that before in like an established RPG setting. So it's great to see.
Yeah, well, and if it exists, I feel like it's always like that one weird continent over there, right? It's like Schultz.
Yeah.
It's like go there, have like a weird, Savage Lands kind of adventure, and then come back and get to the real story. I was like, no, that stuff is so cool. Let's just stay there.
Very.
And one of the things that I think I really appreciate about Planegea as well is this idea that, like, and I hate to do this, except I don't really, but it's not like you try and reinvent the wheel, right? Like, you basically just try and reflavor the wheel in a lot of places, because a lot of the things that people love about D&D, in fact, I'd say most of, if not all of them, are still here. And that's what's really good about it, is that it's like D&D works for a reason. And to like, I think what you're getting at, especially when it comes to the contest, is that so many people were like, well, let's chuck out this half of D&D and rejigger it so it makes sense to in my setting. Whereas here you're like, nah, D&D is fucking dope. Like, let's see it in this different light. And we're going to do it through this lens. This is the lens that we're going to see it. And then you really dig down and drill into the what's the word that we always use, Daniel? What is it? It's the implication is what I'm getting at. It's all about the implication about your world. So when you talk about, you have numbers that are 1 through 10 and then many, like there's implications to that you get to explore within the setting. Just like there's stuff about metal and agriculture. And it's like all of that's there. You can still have really interesting stories that just causes you to think in such a different way. That and again, I think that what's really important to the setting as well are those 3 pillars. So it's like, hey, these are the stories that we really, really want to tell and what that we really want to focus on. And that's what I think Planegea does so well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I appreciate that. I've seen settings which I admire the creativity of, where they say like, the big thing in our world is elves are savage brutes and orcs are sort of like elegant leaders. And sort of questions of, how races are presented in D&D aside, that sort of, let's take what it is and just flip it, was not what I wanted to do here. I really wanted to do what you're talking about, which is let's take everything that is, and like, an elf, as we understand them from tropes, are inherently dope. Like they're so cool. And how do you take that and keep everything that's awesome about them and just like rewind the clock to a more raw, sort of primitive form or primal form, but still retain, like it's got to feel like an elf. And that was the goal for absolutely every monster class, everything that we sort of reinterpreted. It had to retain its inherent identity while perhaps having a very different role in a world where the rules are all different.
So that's another question, is you mentioned elves and how we reinterpret them, especially with Planegea being like a primordial setting. And this question I'm sure is going to come up elsewhere, and you've addressed it before, is so D&D, has faced criticism recently for like having an essentialist view of fantasy races, and then the issues with the Vistani. With Planegea, how do you avoid, what does the setting do to avoid like the savage, trope basically? And how would you steer players away from thinking that way?
Yeah, I think that's a lot of what the the Hounds of the Blind Heaven are there for, and the Black
Mhm.
Taboos. I think that the underlying assumption that the setting didn't really work until I was able to come up with the Black Taboos to say these people are smart. These are smart, brilliant, cunning, clever, charming survivors, inventors, thinkers, poets, warriors. It has nothing to do, it's sort of like your level of technology has nothing to do with how brilliant or
Mhm.
powerful or human you are. It's all to do with sort of the limitations that are placed upon you and the opportunities that present themselves to you. And so, in a world that's bent around survival and has strong limitations from sort of this very low ceiling of technology, um, uh, kins, which is our word for what mechanically are represented by races in 5e, band together or break apart strictly on can we survive together. So you don't have sort of large kinship enclaves as the default. The default is people are mingled together because they're stronger when they're surviving in mixed groups. And kinship is a part of your identity, but it doesn't define you in any way. And I think that's one key way, I think. And also just making the stakes higher than,
Mhm.
are you smart enough to survive a bear? Like, the basic assumption in the setting
Mhm.
is pretty much everyone can survive a bear. They're all alive now. The problem is there's liches and dragons and, unspeakable horrors in the night. And so that, I think, helps get past the sort of savagery,
Mhm.
the wrong path there.
I mean, I like the concept of there's an equalizer and the fact that all of these groups have to figure out how to survive together. And so, their differences in other ways might be irrelevant given that they have to survive in this crazy, landscape.
Yeah, and another kinship group has a survival strategy that is of great value to you, right? If
Mhm.
you've got elves who are sort of half dream and can move between the world of dreams and the world of waking, which they can in Planegea, then like they have access to magic or secret ways through the world that you need to survive the brutal winter that's coming on. So
Right.
there's much
Right.
more, orcs are like, you are big and strong and I want you on my side, right? So it's much more about sort of admiring and desiring the strengths of other kins rather than sort of xenophobia and pushing and othering, because in a world where everything is trying to kill you, there's less time
Yeah.
for othering.
Mhm.
I
Exactly.
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think putting the clans at the center of life in the setting, having those clans at the center of life in the setting, is really key because it gives you the mechanism by which you are defining who you are and what your culture is and who you are associating with, not by your kin, but by the choice of clan and who you are going to survive with. I think that's really essential.
Mhm.
I think the other thing too that I think David kind of undersells, because I think he just does it instinctively, is that the kins, the different groups, the elves and the dwarves and the orcs and everything else, they are not defined by their personality. You don't have the aloof elves or the taciturn Scottish dwarves or the angry orcs. What you have instead is is much more about the fantastical abilities of these different kins, and because the focus is on that, it allows it to be much more about what do we do together,
Mm.
rather than like, oh well, the orcs are all some sort of uniculture over there. If that makes sense.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
it's avoiding the monoculture is always important with like rich world building, I think. And one of the things that I do find really interesting about the kins is like how, it's kind of like, hey, everyone's a friend when there's teeth in the dark, like you
Mhm.
really
Right.
want to avoid something that's going to fucking murder you without any remorse. And actually, Justin, you give me a pretty interesting segue here is that so obviously we've just spent about the better part of a half an hour talking about how amazing and how interesting Planegea is. And what I was really curious about as a developer, right? Like, what did David do to sell you the best that he could on Planegea, besides everything that we know about it, what really comes across to you as a developer on like the business side of things?
On the business side of things, well, let me start with the creative side of things, and then I will segue back to
Yeah.
the business side of things specifically. I mean, the biggest thing David did in terms, I guess, there's a mixture here. I guess we'll say this: the biggest thing David did when he came to us was that what he was presenting was not just like an idea. He had a complete package of setting that he was able to show to us, and the biggest sales point for Planegea for me was literally sitting down with the rough draft of the book that David handed and reading through it. And on every single page, I was like, I want to be there. I want to do that. I want to run an adventure there. I have 3 new ideas for adventures. And then turning the page and having it happen again. And that to me is just kind of whether as a fan or a publisher, that's the biggest sales point of an RPG book is how many ideas is it giving me for cool things to do in a session, whether that's full adventures or like cool moments or just things I want to share with my friends and my players. And Planegea just had that in spades. So that's in terms of like what do you need for your calling card, the first thing is, be awesome. But the other thing David had done even before he came to Atlas was that David had done a ton of work in building an existing community of fans. There was a Planegea subreddit that was active with people sharing their ideas, and David was active and participating in that, and the shared excitement of that environment. And now there's a Discord, and he's also sort of the podcast he was talking about. So from a purely business standpoint, when somebody comes to you and says, I have an awesome idea, that's great. And they say, by the way, I also have several hundred people who are already excited about it. Like you don't have to do like who's going to buy this. You're like, well, I know who's going to buy it. The trick is just how many more people can we make aware of what these people already know and what I know now, that this is something special and this is something awesome. And that was kind of a similar experience to what I had with Magical Kitties Save the Day, which is the role-playing game we did last year, the all ages role-playing game, and that was kind of a similar experience where again there was the creator Matthew Hansen came, and he had an amazing package. We actually as a company found that game by playing in a game he had run at a local convention, and so we were at the beginning. We get excited about it, and then we look around and we say, well, okay, well, there's this existing community, whether small or medium or large, that is already excited about this thing. How can we share this excitement? And I've been doing some stuff on my Twitch stream, looking back at the earliest days of D&D, and that's really what Dave Arneson with his original Blackmore campaign was experiencing as well. He had created this thing with his fellow players in St. Paul, Minnesota, in his basement. They had shown up one day and said, let's go into the dungeons beneath Castle Blackmore and invent the modern role-playing game. But his players are super excited about it, and they were telling other people about it, and the community of people who were excited about this new idea grew until Gary Gygax in Lake Geneva said, Dave, you should bring that game over here and run it for me so I see what all the excitement's about. And that's what Dave did. And so, I mean, you look at that again, it's all about having something that you're excited about that then gets other people excited about it. And then from a business standpoint, from an RPG developer standpoint, from a publisher standpoint, that is what my mission is to find these exciting things and use my resources that I have available, that Atlas has available, to let other people know, hey, you should be excited about this too.
That is a perfect summation of how to get published in the industry, if you ask me. Start with awesome, build your brand, and then once that's done, once the hard work's done, then you just got to advertise it, right?
Yep.
All right. So, gentlemen, we are at the point where we are ready to roll into a world building jam. Now, Justin, you've done this part with us, but David, you haven't. What we do here is we're going to roll some dice on a random table that have genres, themes, what we're focusing on, and then we build a setting / scenario based on what we're, talking about within that setting. Halfway through, we fuck everything up by throwing in a twist, and we kind of just all roll with it together. So I'm going to roll some dice, and then we're going to figure out what our genre is first. And that is going to be... So we've got body horror as our genre.
Nice.
All right.
Justin, since you've been on, we've reworked the overall table so they're less generic and way more specific. Like I said, body horror. And the theme that we're going to be focusing on is treachery. So we've got body horror with the theme of treachery. And the first thing that we're going to be focusing on within this setting is a hero. So, as our guests, David and Justin, you're more than welcome to start us off with any ideas that you have surrounding a body horror story centered around treachery, focusing on a hero. So please take it away.
I mean, I think that this is a match made in heaven, right? Because I think core to body horror is being betrayed by your body.
Absolutely.
And I feel like you're dealing with a hero whose body is betraying them, who is heroic because they are fighting the transformation in order to do what is heroic.
Mm-hmm. He is heroic in spite of himself in a lot of ways, is what I'm kind of getting.
Yeah, Justin, improve that idea.
No, yeah, so let's see if we can, like, if we take the theme of treachery and we make it exponential. So you have treachery built on treachery. What if we have something like John Carpenter's The Thing, where there's this alien parasite that creates a treachery of the body,
Mm-hmm.
but then the hero that we're dealing with is someone who's been afflicted by this, who is part of this culture, but is actually betraying whatever that culture is as well. And what I'm wondering is if there's a way to make it so it's not just John Carpenter's The Thing. Is there a way to have a similar vibe that isn't Alien from Outer Space, that isn't Body Snatcher?
Well, we could add a religious aspect to it and make it heretical in some way.
Oh.
So there is some kind of, like, you could make it, I mean, if you want to make it physical and literal, there could be a corruption of, like, in a demonic or a celestial sense, if we wanted to run in that direction with it.
Yeah, there's something interesting about the idea that, if we could move towards the idea of having lots of gods and that almost gods as parasites, where like the more that a god gets you to open your soul to them, or rips your soul open if they're more of a demonic entity, the more they actually start transforming your physical form.
Yeah.
Kind of a stigmata kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so faith is direct transformation. The more faith you have, the more you're transformed.
That's cool.
Or it could be even like a force. For some reason, I'm thinking of, like, this hero of ours is essentially forced to be the avatar for some god that he really doesn't believe in, but for some reason, his faith is essentially being overridden. And it's really a conflict between the two faiths and the two kind of ideals that he has within himself. Alternatively, if you wanted to go a different route, you could also make him be a faithless person who has been inflicted, as he would see it, with some kind of a divine presence as well. But I'm just tossing out ideas. Courtney and Daniel, y'all have been very quiet. I want to hear from you guys.
Kind of like the idea of, like, an angel coming down from heaven and giving you some sort of task or power, and you being like, wait, no, I didn't ask for any of this. Like, I didn't want this at all. But you're stuck with it.
There is a body horror element even in, like, an ineffable angel that is beyond the description of physical words comes down to you and says, oh, by the way, my boss made you pregnant.
Oh God!
Right.
Yeah,
it's pretty close. That's pretty close to the standard mythology there.
Right. I mean, it doesn't have to be. Obviously, pregnancy has to be the thing, but like, but that central element of, like, ineffable beings coming down and saying, "By the way, we're changing your body for you."
It's kind of like Warlock Joan of Arc, right? It's like they're speaking to you, and you have a mission, whether or not you want it, but also they're changing you physically at the same time.
Oh yeah, like the idea of let's call them stigmatics, right? And they're kind of like the chosen of the gods, but they don't actually, they're chosen by the gods. They don't choose. So it's not a manifestation of your faith, because that wouldn't really be necessarily horrific. But like, these chosen have voices, And part of the physical transformation is also that you begin speaking in tongues, in voices, but it's not your voice. So it's really, the chosen is basically gods, or whatever are choosing to call themselves gods, are basically literally taking over your existence.
I was about to get to that because I feel like I wanted to borrow something from Planegea of like the gods. These are the new gods, so they're not really metaphysical beings. They're actually visceral, but they're interpreted that way. So maybe these things that they're approaching, like they have some physicality to them that bring about this transformation.
They're gods that you can. Oh, well, actually, if we take it that way, if we want to approach gods as like a physical thing, maybe gods need people to grow. And I mean that unlike in a physical sense. So like you're forced to like withstand the physicality of this god in some way as it grafts onto your body or something like that.
Or the speaking transmits that somehow, like Justin was saying.
Yeah, there's something to it. See, this is what I love, is that a couple of dice rolls and some really creative people, and we're just off to the races with all sorts of horrifying ideas, which I love.
Well, there's potentially something to the idea that like the old image of the god in the hollow, right? That like that the gods were intensely local before they grew larger than that, and that these new stigmatic gods have figured out that the way to spread yourself from the hollow, like rather than mass communication, which is what did it in the real world, the way to spread yourself from the hollow is to like make these stigmatic duplicates of yourself, and then these duplicates can go forth and found their own hollows. And so like these sort of primal divine wars are just literally squabbling territories of these physically altered stigmatics.
This is almost gods as a disease, right?
Yeah.
They infect you and it spreads.
I actually had there are those ants that get infected with the fungus.
Yes.
And that's how they spread their spores. That's exactly the type of thing that I have in mind here.
And it's almost more powerful than your average faith because and this is my cynical point of view, the regular transmission of a faith requires accepting it, right, and believing it. Whereas this one, it's specifically targeting those that don't believe to transmit itself.
Yeah. There's also, and this might just be because Dune is coming out, but like the idea of sort of being unwillingly transformed into a god is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, with like Paul essentially, yeah.
Yeah, and like, how would you even stop that? Like, once that process is started, how do you fight against a god that's trying to inhabit your body?
Well, I mean, the interesting story there too is like it's obviously horrific if you're not of the faith, but it's almost worse if you actually like believe in whatever doctrines these gods are teaching, but then that you begin getting transformed and realizing this isn't some sort of like ascension, it is actually just a destruction of yourself. I mean, that's the ultimate treachery, right?
Oh, it's a total and complete shattering of one's faith in what they previously believed in. Yeah.
And maybe the way you answer that question, how do you resist it, is you accept that you're being transformed, but you pervert the purpose. So whatever the faith actually preaches, you choose your own path, which is kind of what Paul does in the future. So you do something opposite or adjacent to whatever they want you to do with that newfound power.
Choose heresy. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and then then there comes your hero role in almost like a blade kind of way, where like you have the powers, but you choose to use them to fight the thing that you were created by. That the treachery which born you is now the treachery of you turning on the thing which created you.
Oh,
absolutely. So I think we've approached the point where now we get to take a really interesting, cool idea and potentially fuck everything up with a dice roll. So we're going to throw in the twist, and we're going to really hope that we don't get something like turn everything anime.
Please no.
So it says here that family gets involved. So what is our interpretation of family getting involved with this whole situation?
Well, there could be a genetic component to the stigmatics, or it could also be like a seventh son of a seventh son thing, where it's not so much about the like genetics per se, as it is about some sort of dynamic of the family relationship that creates the opportunity.
maybe the family had, sort of done something to their child to prepare it for this, to be a vessel for the god. And once the child learns that, I imagine shit would go down.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm thinking of. I'm blanking on the name. In the Bible, who's the one who tries to sacrifice his child in the name of God?
Abraham.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. In a sense, it almost makes me feel like there's an Abraham situation happening here, where it's like the child isn't the one who chooses, but it's the parent. The parent is the one who says, "You are ordained by the God I believe in to become a stigmatic," right? Like it maybe there is a seed of pure faith that has to be born in the next generation, and that's how we can involve the family.
Yeah, standard religious eugenics makes sense.
Well, and this is maybe me trying to force wonder into what should just be horror, but I feel like, it could also be, I don't know. I respond to horror where it's not just all totally bleak, but there's also like points of light. And so I wonder if perhaps like, you've got this question of hero and betrayal and family. Maybe there's a sense of a possibility of rescue or of truth breaking through or of hope that's coming through family somehow.
Maybe all of the these alien god infected thingies aren't necessarily all bad. Maybe there's ones to be found that can be allied with in this treachery hero's reversal of the situation.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, but we can also approach the story as one of the faithful watching a stigmatic go through the process. So to them, it might be something that's genuinely awe-inspiring, like something that is affirming their faith, watching the stigmatic go through what they're going through. Like it's all a matter of a perspective change, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about you. I think that that's where we should probably stop with all that, because I think that that's the best we're going to do for the time being without, creating a Discord and eventually pitching our game down. So that leads us into the rapid fire question round. No one's ever ready for this, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you, David. My wife wants to know, is cereal a soup?
Oh, I have a whole thing about this. All food can be broken into 4 categories: soup, salad, steak, and soup, salad, steak, and sandwich. And so absolutely, cereal is definitely a soup.
All right. Thank you so much. That's another point for the soup side. Now, I also want to know, what are you playing and what have you been playing recently?
I only ever play D&D. Baldur's Gate 3 is also D&D, and then I guess just mindless phone games. Really enjoying Balls with a Z, which is like a block breaker. That's a really good time waster.
I agree with you there. Justin, same question. What are you playing now and what have you been playing recently?
I've actually been playing Feng Shui, one of Atlas's other RPGs. We have a bunch of adventures coming out for it, so I've been playtesting those with my local group. I am about to launch a new D&D 5th edition campaign, and I am currently experimenting with an open table for Magical Kitties Save the Day. Oh, and I'm also really excited to be getting back into Gloomhaven. My Gloomhaven game had been put on hold for the entire pandemic, but we have all gotten vaccinated now, of course, and are able to get back together and rediscover that mammoth box.
Oh,
I just started to get back into that over the weekend, actually, with my boyfriend, and just immediately died, right away. First scenario, maybe halfway through, and and it was good.
Love it. Oh, also shout out to Sushi Go with my kids and wife. That is a good time.
That's a good game.
Yeah. All right. Daniel or Courtney, rapid fire questions for David and Justin.
Well, obviously, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, yeah. How did we miss that? You're right.
Justin, go.
Brontosaurus from the time I was very young. I had an amazing plastic Brontosaurus toy, and it's been my favorite ever since. And I'm very excited that I can call them Brontosauruses again without people pedantically correcting me.
I was heartbroken when the Brontosaurus was made non-canon, and I'm delighted once again.
Hey, I stopped paying attention to dinosaurs once they decided they had feathers. I'm like, well, that's not gonna happen.
They're not cool anymore.
David, what was yours?
I've had too many favorites over the years. I was really partial for a long time to the Parasaurolophus because that crest was really cool. And my cousin had this theory that they could breathe fire and that the crest let them breathe fire. And I was like, yes, that is dope.
I agree. Yeah. And my second question is Conan the Barbarian or He-Man?
For me, it's Conan all the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Conan all the way. Yeah.
Cool.
That's the correct answer. That's the correct answer. Courtney, any questions?
What TV shows have you been into lately, if any?
Ted Lasso.
Yes.
So wonderful. I am all about. Have you guys heard of New Sincerity, like the David Foster Wallace joint?
No.
So there's like an art movement called the New Sincerity, which I officially count Planegea as part of. And Ted Lasso is that. It is just like genuinely good-hearted, genuinely hopeful. I know it got horror in my setting, but it's like meant to be deeply optimistic.
I can second that. I can second that as well. Ted Lasso is like pure joy in the form of a TV show. It is so kind-hearted.
I suspect that my wife will actually kill me if I don't watch Ted Lasso soon. So I'll be joining the cult in the
I'm right there with you, Justin. I'm so hesitant because everybody's preaching it. I'm like, I guess I got to join the cult.
Yes.
There we go.
Just do the first 5 minutes. This is always my rule. Anytime people won't shut up about a TV show, all you have to commit to is the first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Totally fair.
No, I'm actually looking forward to it. I just haven't had time to get into it the past month, but soon. But what I've been watching lately is actually I watched a sadly canceled TV series called Debris, which was from one of the creators of Fringe. And the concept was that there was a alien spaceship that entered the solar system, but our telescopes are like, okay, well, that's an alien spaceship, but it appears to be in pieces. And then the pieces begin falling to Earth. And so there's a task force that goes out and tries to track down the debris that's having strange effects. It gets off to a little bit of a slow start. The first couple of episodes, the show is far more interested in soap opera than it is in the alien artifacts. But 3 or 4 episodes in, it gets over itself and it's like, oh, we're all here for the alien artifacts, right? I'm like, yes, that is why we are here. Do more with those. I actually just watched 10,000 BC for the first time. David confirmed me.
How is it?
I liked it. I mean, I'm not going to go as far as you to say it's flawless, but it is a solid pulp fantasy cult movie. Like I think back to all the movies of my youth, things like Beastmaster and like the original Conan the Barbarian movie, and like it is 100% in that vein and totally enjoyable. I mean, like so many people critique it's like, well, it's not historically accurate. I'm like, it's not.
Not supposed to be.
That is 100% true. But it does have mammoths on a pyramid with a divine god, so I'm going to just lean back and accept it.
You might have just convinced me to check it out. Yeah,
it's not the greatest film of all time, but it's a lot of fun, and certainly got me in the mood to do some Planegea. And then Loki is the other thing I watched in the past couple of weeks.
I've been putting that off, and I'm really excited to just like binge all of it at once. I'm right there with you.
It is 100% worth it.
All right.
Oh, Mythic Quest. Also, my wife does not care about video games at all, and she's like, we watched Mythic Quest, and she's like, we're starting this over and watching it again.
Wow,
it's wonderful. Mythic Quest is great.
I keep hearing good things about that one.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at the point where I have one more question for you, and that is, I would love for you to tell me about someone who is not yourself, who you'd like to plug and give a shout out to. And obviously, you can't do each other. That's not how this.
Dang it! I found the loophole. I found the loophole.
let me sow that before I see what happens happening before me. Yeah.
Amazing. I'll plug the podcast that inspired D&D, not D&D, that inspired Planegea. It's the Manifest Zone with Keith Baker, Appendix N Book Club, and also Mastering Dungeons with Sean Merwin and Teos Abadia is a masterclass. It is phenomenal, and they do such a good coverage of 5e news. I love it. I can't wait for Thursdays every time a new episode drops.
Very exciting. And Justin.
I think I'm going to go ahead. This arrived in my mailbox last night, so it's fresh in my mind. The Lost Dungeons of Tonisborg by Greg Svensson. Greg Svensson was a member of Dave Arneson's original Blackmoor group and actually became not exactly a co-GM with Dave, but his Tonisborg setting, which was another dungeon under a castle, which was basically what all dungeon masters did for the first 2 or 3 years of the game was just dungeons under castles. Because a bit of a tangent, but so Dave Arneson creates Blackmoor, which is a castle with a big dungeon under it, and people don't really know what this new game is, but they know it's fun. So when they're trying to capture what's fun about it, they're like, well, it's the castle with the dungeon under it, so we're just going to keep making castles with dungeons under it. So Gary Gygax makes Greyhawk castle with a dungeon under it, and then Greg Svensson made Tonisborg, which was a castle with a dungeon under it, and the players in Dave Arneson's campaign could actually just go down the road to Tonisborg and go into Greg Svensson's dungeon. Well, a group was making a documentary called Secrets of Blackmoor a couple years ago, discovered that Greg Svensson still had all of his original notes from that dungeon. And so they have actually published this dungeon, this D&D dungeon from before D&D was published. Can now be purchased with replications of the original maps and original key, and also expanded keys and descriptions from Greg Svensson. So I haven't had a chance to actually dive in and begin reading the thing yet because, like I said, it just showed up last night. But this is the thing I'm currently hyped up about. So as soon as I find 5 minutes, I'm going to be diving into that.
That is wild and really exciting. Yeah. Who knew that going into a forest would be so innovative, right? At one point. All right, gentlemen, that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. As usual, it's been a blast. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you for having us. We love this.
Absolutely. It's really great again.
Yeah, and tell people where we can find you and all of your things online.
I'm easiest to just find at Planegea on Twitter, Planegea on Reddit. I don't tweet personally, but I'm SMRVL, which is my last name with all the extra letters taken out on Reddit, and spend way too much time there.
You can find out a lot of the stuff I'm doing at atlasgames.com. That's atlas-games.com. You can find my personal role-playing game site and news site at The Alexandrian, at thealexandrian.net. And you'll find all kinds of game mastering advice and remixes of adventures and all kinds of cool stuff there. I also stream on Twitch, and I also have a Discord, and I also have a YouTube channel with new videos coming out on the regular. So, but if you go to thealexandrian.net, you'll find sort of the central hub with links to everything else.
Fantastic. And as I understand it, you also have a Kickstarter going on right now. Is that right?
Yes, we have a Kickstarter running right now for Planegea to bring this whole world right into your laps, more or less. We have the book itself. We have an awesome adventure. We have a soundtrack that's going to be part of that package as well. There's a deluxe edition, which is just going to be svelte, I believe is the key word we've been talking about for that. So just a ton of amazing stuff. And our stretch goals involve unlocking a whole bunch more really cool adventures from David and his brain trust set in Planegea. So we're excited about that too.
You can definitely sign me up for that as well. That sounds really exciting. Gentlemen, again, so glad to have you on, and hopefully that Kickstarter goes really well. I'm sure that by the time this goes up, you'll have already smashed every goal, I'm sure.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we're back. I just wanted to thank David and Justin so much for being with us again. I know that by the time that this episode comes out, they would have probably already smashed their Kickstarter goals. Big thanks again for having them on. That'll do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, and click a link and click the button on top. Oh my God. And click the button to submit your writing prompt. If you want to follow us on social media, you can always go to Twitter and find us at Let's Worldbuild. And over at Let's Worldbuild. And if you want to join our Discord, and if you want to join our community over on Discord, or if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always give us money over on Patreon with a link for both of those in the description. That'll do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much. We're going to get through this together. Until next week.